就从现在开始。那我们今天下午的第一场演讲，我们邀请到的是加拿大的开发者 Kane， 那也是多人同乐的 VR 炸弹拆解游戏 Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes 的创作者。那今天 Ben 会跟大家分享当初 Keep Talking 这个非对称玩法的由来，以及如何从 Game Jam 创作的游戏雏形，进一步发展到成功的游戏作品获奖且上市的过程和经验，还有他对 VR 产业的一些想法。那让我们用热烈掌声欢迎 Ben。
Okay. Hello. How about now? Hello. There we go. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. So this is my talk called Building Atop, the Shifting Sands of Virtual Reality. And I'm part of the team that made Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. We're a Canadian team of 3. That's a picture of us at the Global Game Jam a couple years ago. On the left is Brian, in the middle is Alan, and on the right is me. We're the 3 core people behind the game. We also contract out for our music from Liam Sauvé and our artwork from Chris Taylor. But as far as design and programming goes, it's these 3 guys here. And since that's what this talk mostly focuses on, you can think of it as the 3 of us working on it. Now, out of curiosity, how many people here have had a chance to play Keep Talking? Has anyone played it at all? 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's not bad. So I'm gonna take a minute to show a quick video of how the game works, just so you can get a sense of what it's all about. So this is our launch trailer, or it will be.
Okay, I see a ball. It's got wires, a button. Okay, I see a ball. It's got wires, a button, keypad.
So we're going to go wires one by one, left to right, okay? The first wire doesn't have any light on the top, does not.
Symbol, let's do the symbol, sure.
It's like a Y and an I. Yeah, it looks like a candelabra.
Okay.
It's been nice knowing you, Frank.
Okay, so it's a game about defusing a bomb. It's a cooperative game. One person sees the bomb and they need to cut the right wire or push the right button, but they don't know what they're doing. The other players in the game have a manual, and that tells you how to defuse every sort of bomb imaginable. But people reading the manual don't get to see the bomb, and the person who sees the bomb doesn't get to see the manual. So the whole point of the game is that both sides have to talk and try to figure out these puzzles. And it can get pretty intense. I'll show just one more clip of some really talented players playing in a group. They're actually playing over Skype. So this is the last 30 seconds of their game.
All right, here we go, kids. We are hardcore. Maybe. We are. Thank you for the name.
We're not going to watch this whole thing.
Nope. Oh, well, we'll write one about our death of this bomb. All right, Spirit, get ready for complex wires. Tara, get ready. Billy, your number's 4.
Push the 4th position button.
Okay, that's a 4. Panel wires, black to C.
No.
Black to C.
Yes.
Blue, red to B.
No.
Okay, Kaylee, 1.
That'll be a 3.
Done! Oh, screenshot at that. 0.71 seconds.
Nice.
0.71. 0.71 seconds. Oh.
So those are some fans of our game, playing the game just a couple days before our launch. Actually, they made that video just off a recording from Twitch, and they put it up on YouTube, and it got something like 1 million or 1.5 million views, which was fantastic. It showed off how tense our game can get towards the very end. So we ended up releasing our game late last year, and we won the IGF award for excellence in design. So design is kind of the biggest thing that we're proud of in our game, and it's mostly what this talk pertains to. And specifically, it's about how VR technology has changed over the past couple of years and how that has influenced our design. Now, with that said, our game is not just a VR game. You saw in those videos, a lot of people were not playing with VR headsets. Some of them were, but a lot of them weren't. We ended up shipping with a non-VR mode, so the game is available on PC and Mac if you just use a regular monitor. We do also support lots of VR platforms like the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. But what this basically means is that we have a lot of players who are not playing in virtual reality. We've sold, I think, close to 300,000 copies of the game so far. So most people actually don't play in virtual reality. And one of the things that we came to the conclusion based on that was that our game is really more of a communication party game. It happens to be best in virtual reality, but virtual reality is not the most important thing to our game's design. So this talk is going to be a bit of a post-mortem for the game, but it's not completely a post-mortem because we are still working on Keep Talking, but the design of the game is complete. So I want to share a story of how VR technology changed and how that influenced our design. And although the game ended up being quite successful, I'm hoping that I can convey it wasn't really a clear path on how to get there. So the talk's going to be in 3 parts. I'm going to talk a bit about where this weird idea came from. And then the meat at the top is going to be on the role of virtual reality and how that influenced our design. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about the future. So starting off, where this weird thing came from. And although I said we do support non-VR and our main design priority is not VR, virtual reality is 100% the reason why this game exists. And it all stems from the Global Game Jam. In 2014, so about 2.5 years ago, January 2014, we brought our headsets to the Global Game Jam. We had Oculus DK1s, and we wanted to make something in VR. But we were having trouble coming up with an exciting idea. But at the same time, there were a lot of other developers there, and they had never tried VR. So we put them in the standard Unreal roller coaster demo that everyone was trying at the time. And they had a great time. Their minds were blown, their jaws dropped. But the problem was only one mind could be blown at once, and only one jaw could be dropped at once, because we only had one headset. And there were a lot more developers interested in it. So the situation that came up was one person would be looking around, having a great time, and a whole crowd of other people would just kind of be watching them. And they're thinking, that's gotta be fun, I wonder what they're seeing. And we thought that was kind of ridiculous. You have all these people that are clearly interested, but they're totally removed from the game. And so we thought, what if we could give them some information that the person in VR needed? What if we could play off the fact that they see something different than the person in virtual reality? And so we came up with a bunch of scenarios, but since we only had 2 days of the Game Jam, we thought bomb defusing was something we could pull off. And equally important was, because we only had 2 days, we weren't going to do 2 different video games and try to network them together in some way. That would just be too much. So the people outside virtual reality were just going to have some paper with some information on it. That was all we could pull off. So that's basically where the game came from. Players outside would have paper with information of which wires to cut. People inside VR would do all the actions and have all the information about the specific randomly generated bomb. So we made the game over 48 hours, and very importantly, we also recorded a video of the very first people playing the game. And we put it on YouTube, and that got picked up by a bunch of different gaming websites, like Kotaku and Engadget. And after just a few days, we had well over 100,000 views. And for us, we had just kind of teamed up for the first time. This seems fantastic. People were clearly interested in the idea. But we'd never worked together before that weekend. One of the guys on the team actually wasn't a game developer at all. And we knew that making a game together was going to be a really big commitment. So we sat down and we came up with a bit of a plan. And I'm paraphrasing what our plan was, but it actually is pretty close to this. We met at a coffee shop and we wrote these things down. And these were our goals. We wanted to keep exploring this neat VR concept because we worked on it for a weekend and we had lots more ideas. We didn't know where the game would go. And along the way, we wanted to enjoy the ride. We liked the idea of VR, it seemed exciting. We liked the idea of going to conferences and showing off the game to lots of new people. So that was one of our main driving factors. We just wanted to have fun making a game. And the last one is that we weren't overly concerned with return on investment. We weren't looking to make a lot of money off this. And the reason we weren't concerned was because we felt the investment could be really small. Yes, we would invest a lot of our time, but we were okay with that. And we weren't going to spend a lot of money. It would just be the three of us working on it. We weren't going to hire people. We weren't going to get an office or anything like that. And if we could keep our own investment small, then it didn't really matter if we didn't make a lot of money on this thing. And we weren't concerned with the return on investment, not because we lacked confidence in ourselves. It was more that we had no idea how virtual reality was going to turn out. This was early 2014, and it seemed like consumer headsets might take until 2015 to come out. And it turned out to take a lot longer than that. Now, having said that, that plan was why we made all of our decisions. That was the context in which we made all of the decisions. It's probably not the same as your context. The idea of not being concerned about making any money, that might be really scary for a lot of people. And although we planned to not really have a really formal plan, it's not something I would call a mistake, but I would hesitate to recommend it either. It just happened to work for us. The really scary part is the three of us agreed we would be happy as long as we finished this game. If we spent a lot of time and a small amount of money and we made nothing, we were okay with that. We wrote it down. We were okay not making any money. We lose money on this, we're fine, we're just going to enjoy the ride. Now, if you have a studio with a burn rate, if you have family members you need to support, that's probably unappealing to like outright terrifying. But this is how we made our decisions. So with that in mind, we started making this weird game. And Keep Talking is weird in a lot of different ways. Virtual reality in 2014 and even 2015, and maybe even still now, is uncommon. In 2014, it was very uncommon. So that helped us stand out. We also had this idea of single copy multiplayer, which is a little hard to convey to people, but since only one person needs to be playing on a computer or in a headset, you can play with a lot of other people if they just get the manual. And they can get the manual from our website for free. It's not a video game. They could print it out. A lot of people do. And that means that you can have many people playing your game, but only one person needs to actually buy it, which is a little strange. We also have a game that is based largely on communication. So your experience will differ greatly depending on who you play with. There's also asymmetry in the roles. The diffuser plays a video game and has a certain set of information. The experts read from a manual and they have completely different information. There's very little overlap between them. And they're also completely different formats. One person's playing a video game, the other person might be looking at a sheet of paper. Now, all of these weird things actually worked really, really well for us. It stands out enough that people found our concept memorable. We also got a lot of press coverage, I think because press in general is looking for a story to tell. It's a lot easier if they can tell a story rather than try to just cover a new game. And with our game, you sit press down and they will play with other members of the press or their friends, and they will create their own story based on their experience there. That's just kind of how our game works. People will talk, things will happen, they will have a unique experience, and that's a story that they can tell right away. We also have a pretty easy to grasp premise. If you've watched an action movie, there's probably been a scene where the hero needs to defuse a bomb, so people are really quick to pick up on what this game is about. And lastly, it's really accessible. You have one diffuser and potentially many experts. And those experts could just be reading from paper. They need to know how to read and they need to be able to talk to you, but that's it. They actually don't need to know how to play a video game. And we did not realize the power of this right away. but you can really reach a broader audience if they don't need to be playing a video game. A lot of people will consider themselves not game players and they won't be interested, but if you hand them a paper manual and say, help me out, suddenly they're willing to give it a shot. And all of these things got us a lot of positive feedback. We would have people say things like, Keep Talking really makes use of virtual reality, or it solves virtual reality's isolation problem, which I kind of want to take a bit of an aside to go through. This idea of solving a problem with virtual reality, the idea that you put on a headset and you're completely removed from the world around you, and that somehow that's a problem or undesirable. But I don't think it is at all. I think isolation from your outside surroundings is actually an opportunity more than a problem. It's not a big deal to be removed from the things around you. A lot of entertainment is escapism. You want to lose yourself in a book. You want to watch a movie and not be aware of things around you. That's not a problem on its own. And other than that, if you're in a VR game, you could be playing a multiplayer game with other people online. And having head tracking and hand tracking can make for a really social experience. So just because you're playing inside a headset doesn't mean you're removed from society in any way. So really I see isolation as an opportunity to do neat things like Keep Talking, where there's two different sets of information. But by no means do you have to go this route. It would be really boring if everybody made games the same way that Keep Talking is. I do think we do something kind of neat, but by all means you do not need to take advantage of this. So I don't think Keep Talking solves isolation. I think it uses it in kind of a neat way, but in general, isolation is totally fine. Now, our weird game is not without its costs. It's really hard to explain how our game works. People just are not familiar with this sort of style. It's bizarre to say, okay, you need to buy the game. Everyone else can go to a website and just read a manual. That's not normal. People don't have an understanding of that or an expectation of how it works. So it's a lot of effort to try to communicate this to people. And it's weird to host a manual at all. We're used to making video games and shipping them in certain ways, pushing new builds to Steam. Now all of a sudden we're managing our Amazon hosting as well, and we have to push this newly generated manual to our website. It's just an extra complication. And strangely enough, our manual gets printed out by a lot of people, but the manual contains the rules of the game. So now we're shipping a software product, a video game, that relies on some logic that people might have printed out. And that's super weird because you can't just push a patch to Steam, push an update, if it's no longer compatible with the paper that people have printed out. We tried really hard to make sure we would never invalidate something that somebody had printed out. And that took a lot of careful planning. But by far, the biggest cost of all of this, and something that relates to many more games, is mixed messaging around virtual reality. Because our game was, it spawned from virtual reality, and we think it's best in virtual reality, but we also desperately need people to know that you don't require virtual reality to play. So those two fighting ideas are really difficult. And sometimes we'll get people who come up to us and they'll find out we made the game, and they'll be really excited about it, and they say they've heard of it and they want to play it, but they just don't have a VR headset. And so we've gone through all that work of trying to get someone to know and care about our game, and we failed at that last moment where they think they lack the equipment to play. That's something we're still struggling with, and I think it's something that probably plagues a lot of people who are trying to hit both VR and non-VR. Okay, so how did we get to making this game? What was the process like? I like to say that we discovered our game more so than we developed it, and that's because we play tested it constantly at different conferences. So we largely went to conferences in North America, things like the Penny Arcade Expo, or E3, or GDC, and we were doing so many of these that we would take our game to a conference, and then for a few weeks afterwards, we would make all the bug fixes and add any new features we could think of, and then we'd be taking it to another conference. And we just repeated that, observing people, seeing where they got stuck, seeing what they enjoyed, and iterating on the game that way. And it's a good thing we did this, because initially, we didn't really know what our game was about. We thought it was about diffusing bombs, some sort of simulation, different scenarios from movies, but it turns out that people are really interested in the communication aspect of it. That's where the stories come from. Our game is about talking with your friends, it's about panicking and making mistakes. The whole idea of communicating is where the fun of Keep Talking lies. And this has a few important impacts on the game, but as far as this talk is concerned, this is the most important point. We came to the conclusion that decisions in our game, so which wire to cut, for instance, coming to that decision should be really hard, because that's what takes two people, that's where people need to talk back and forth, and as a team they need to decide what to do. So that should be the hard, meaty part of our game. The input, however, should be really easy. You don't want someone, you don't want a team to decide, okay, we need to cut the red wire, and then the one person in the video game just makes a mistake. Maybe they pick the wrong one. That's not fun. The team hasn't failed in that case. It's just one person who maybe struggled with a game controller, or maybe we made it too complicated to cut a wire. That's a really unsatisfying way to fail. So we tried to make inputs as easy as possible. And if you look at this, you'll realize that this really has nothing to do with virtual reality. And this is how we came to the conclusion that our game was about communication first and virtual reality second. Since this was the most important part of our game, and it doesn't really relate to virtual reality, some of our decisions are going to be in favor of this at the expense of virtual reality. And we'll see that as we go on. So just to revisit our plan a little bit, our plan is roughly the same. We're still going to explore this neat VR concept, but our main goal will be to foster interesting communication. Try to make scenarios where people say the wrong things or get flustered or panic, and just have interesting back and forth communication. So with that in mind, let's look at how VR technology changed. Because as we were discovering our game and developing it, VR technology was rapidly evolving. From 2014 to today, things have changed quite a lot in a short term. And really, since VR has changed so much, our game has been influenced by it in a lot of really important ways up to a certain point, and we'll see how that happens. Now, the specific history that I'm going to go through here isn't actually that important to people making decisions today. For instance, we'll start off with DK1. I don't think anybody should be deciding, should I support DK1 or not? That's in the past. It's something that you don't really need to consider. But you can kind of shift this timeline along, and you can think, what is the current technology that limits me in the same way DK1 limited us back then? And you can understand how you might make the same sort of decisions. Because these concepts are going to repeat themselves. There will be new technology that allows for new gameplay mechanics, new features, and some of the old technology will become outdated. And if your design is based on that, it's possible that your design could be outdated as well. So, starting with the DK1. It actually came out earlier than this, but we started our game in January 2014. And this, all importantly, gave us virtual reality, period. This gave us the idea for our game. It was, however, a very low resolution device. It was a high persistence screen, so if you moved your head, things tended to smear and get blurry. And it had what we call 3 degrees of freedom. So you could rotate on 3 axes, but you couldn't move your head in space. So if you translated to the side, that wouldn't be represented in the game in any way. But the DK1 gave us the concept for our game, and it got us working on it. It was, however, pretty obvious that we weren't going to be able to ship something we were happy with on this hardware. And we don't actually have a lot of screenshots. This is actually too dark. Okay, never mind. Nope, the screen is gone completely. I need a screen. have any in-house technical people who can tell me why the screen went. I don't think anything has changed on mine.
They're going to get somebody.
Okay. How's everyone doing? Okay. I can keep going without slides. So there was an old screenshot. I won't show it just in case that was the problem. Suffice it to say, it was a really crude-looking game. It was very dark, and all the objects were incredibly big because the low resolution of the original DK1 meant that in order for you to be able to read something, it would need to be about a meter across. So in our original game, we had a bomb that was literally your arm span. It was like this. And that seemed okay at the time, but as soon as we got the DK2, all of that changed. So the DK2 changed a lot of things, but for relevance here, it gave us much better resolution, and it added a positional tracking camera. So it gave us 6 degrees of freedom. You could now move in a limited volume, but you could move from side to side. And one of the things that this gives you is an immediate sense of scale. Just by shifting your head very slightly, you get a depth effect, and you can tell the scale of objects as you would expect them to be in the real world. So if you saw a door at the back of the room and it was maybe 10% smaller than it was supposed to be, you immediately recognize that as being a very strange looking door. And it was surprising, as we put this headset on for the first time, we realized the scale of everything was completely wrong. We also noticed that text was now viable. You could read things in virtual reality. And this was huge for us because our game is about asking questions about what do you see. And now all of a sudden we could have text as part of that. So our game started to have labels, it started to have word problems in it, and it basically got a lot more interesting. Around the same time, locomotion problems in VR were starting to be better understood. Now that the display was a little better, people could more accurately figure out why VR was making people sick. And they noticed that if you used a thumbstick to move yourself around, it made a lot of people nauseous really quickly. And at the time, that was really the extent of the knowledge of this problem. We knew what made people sick, but we didn't really have any solutions to it. So for Keep Talking, we took the easy way out, and we put the player just seated at a desk, and that was it. There would be no locomotion in our game. That was a choice we made just so that people would not feel sick in virtual reality in our game. But it was a pretty major thing because now our game was based on you sitting at a desk observing something right in front of you. And with the DK2, the majority of our game kind of got formed. All the objects got their size based on what you could see in DK2. And the gameplay interactions like cutting wires and pushing buttons, all of it was happening right in front of you. So DK2 was essentially the cool new technology that came out, and our game was early enough on that we could embrace it wholeheartedly. Now from DK1 to DK2, it seemed like a pretty obvious line that there would be an improved DK2, and that would go out to consumers. That we figured would be the Oculus consumer version 1. That would be the next step in the line. Then all of a sudden, this guy came out, the Samsung Gear VR. And this really caught us by surprise. But it was a device that had even better resolution than the DK2. And more importantly, it was really, really portable and easy to set up. You just had to have the right cell phone, but otherwise you could put this thing in your backpack and you could bring it to your friend's house. It also had a touchpad on the side of it, which turned out to be really important because the Gear VR removed a couple things that we had started to rely on. First of all, it removed positional tracking. So you're back to 3 degrees of freedom. You can only kind of look around. You can't move at all. It also didn't ship with any sort of gamepad, which we were relying upon. So we kind of had to go back to the drawing board for our interaction model. And that's where we came up with the idea of gaze controls. So you just need to center your headset and look at what you want to interact with, and then you can tap on the side where there's a touchpad, and it will perform a context-sensitive interaction. So if you look at a wire and you tap, it'll cut the wire. If you look at a button, it'll push the button. And this was kind of committing to the idea of really simple inputs. It reinforced the idea that our game should be about the talking side and that any sort of interaction should really be really simple. On a technical level, the Gear VR was also a big performance challenge. All of a sudden, we were trying to run a game at higher resolution on a cell phone, and that was a lot of work for us. We spent a lot of time on technical problems, which hopefully nobody will ever have to deal with again, but it did take up a lot of our resources. So let's just look at the plan one more time. At the bottom, I said we weren't concerned with the return on investment because the investment will be small. That was our plan. We weren't going to spend a lot of time or money on this thing. And it's true, we weren't spending a lot of money. We were going to a few conferences, but time kept ticking by. This is now late 2014. We've spent pretty much a year on the project. And although at the start we had this kind of loose plan, one shortcoming was that we didn't really agree on what a good amount of time to spend on this project would be. And that kind of made sense because we didn't know how virtual reality was going to pan out. But what we were finding was that our game was getting closer and closer to being a finished product, but virtual reality just was not coming out yet. And here was the Gear VR that was going to ship fairly soon. Although the Gear VR kind of made a bigger commercial splash not too long ago, the original Innovator Edition actually came out in late 2014, so it's been out for quite a while. And Gear VR seemed like a perfect fit for us. We wanted a game that people could play around, which takes about 5 minutes, and then hand it off to their friends. You could switch roles, someone else would try defusing the bomb, and you could share the concept of virtual reality that way. That works a lot better with a portable headset than trying to do it at your PC at home. So Gear VR was what we were going to go with. And we did launch on Gear VR first, but those performance problems I mentioned ended up taking a lot of our time. So although Gear VR came out December of 2014, you'll see we didn't launch until July of 2015. So that's 6 or 7 months of extra development that we really didn't expect to do. Now, because Gear VR was our launch platform, we had to kind of base a lot of our art assets on what the Gear VR could handle. So the look of the game comes from essentially mobile space. We're not doing a lot of stuff with dynamic lighting. We have some fairly basic looking textures, but in sort of a stylized way, because that's what Gear VR can really handle. And so this is what caused our game to look the way it does. Now, around the same time, there was a little platform called Google Cardboard. And we get a lot of questions about whether or not our game works on Google Cardboard. And it does not. We did not port it to Cardboard. I do think Google Cardboard is a really neat product for what it is, but even Google labels it as a 3D viewer. It's not a great device for making games. We had huge problems with performance on it. There's the idea of market fragmentation and only being able to support a few phones. And one of the biggest ones was a lack of standardized input that would be sufficient for us. There is kind of a touch button on it, but we use a swiping motion in addition to tapping. So although we had simplified our controls a lot, we weren't going to be able to make them simple enough to work on Cardboard. So nice 3D viewer, but not a gaming device. So we ended up skipping over that. Now at this stage, the game has launched on a platform. And that means our design is basically finalized. We made a complete game. I'm not saying our design was locked in, but it's kind of like we've made a pizza. It's baked. If you wanted to suddenly insert more ingredients, it's really weird and awkward to do that after the fact. And this isn't laziness. It's just that every aspect of the game has been designed to support every other aspect of the game. And now, if you want to add new features based on new technologies, it's susceptible to feeling tacked on and not really part of the core experience. And the last part is the idea that the assets are probably unlikely to change. This basically stems from us being a very small team. We paid our artists to make one set of assets. We're not really going to do an HD remaster for new platforms. Having said that, although we targeted a mobile platform first, we did kind of author everything at a higher resolution than we needed, and we down-res that to work on Gear VR. That meant we had a little bit of headroom to make the game look a little bit better on more powerful platforms like PC. Speaking of PC, this is a little bit of a digression because this is not the VR part of the talk. This is our non-VR mode. By the time we got to summer 2015, Oculus had announced, yes, the CV1 is finally coming out next year, but our game was already finished. So we figured we could wait until next year, or we could come up with a non-VR mode and ship that right now. If we could get it out soon, we could beat the holiday rush, and that's what we tried to do. So we launched in October 2015, and that meant supporting a non-VR mode, which really entailed adding things like mouse controls so that people didn't need a gamepad, they could play with their mouse. And thankfully, that was a pretty straight translation of gaze controls, because looking at something and tapping becomes moving your mouse pointer and clicking, so the translation was really quick. But time moves on, and virtual reality would still be coming. So the Oculus Rift CV1, the commercial version of the Rift, launched earlier this year. And in many ways, we think of this as a better version of the DK2. It's got improved resolution and frame rate, that sort of thing. It also shipped with a guaranteed gamepad, which was great because we actually require a gamepad in virtual reality because the idea of a mouse moving on kind of a 2D plane, but while you're looking around, never really felt right to us. So we do require a gamepad, and this worked well with the Rift. And it also has built-in headphones, which would normally be great. So the Rift is just kind of a better VR device for us. It doesn't change a lot of things. Our design doesn't need to be adapted for it right now. The only real difference is these headphones that have been added, which is great for 3D audio in a virtual reality game. But we designed a game where you're meant to be talking to someone near you. And now your headset has built-in headphones to kind of prevent that. Thankfully, you can sort of twist them out of the way, and people do end up playing over Skype or other voice chat systems. But it is weird that here's a great new feature of a headset that actually works directly against the game we designed. Now, roughly the same time, the HTC Vive came out. And the Vive does a lot of things, but the big things that stand out are the idea of these tracked wand controllers and the idea of room scale virtual reality. So with the base stations, you can walk around a fairly large area with the Vive. And when the Vive came out, it was really the first sense we got that VR was surpassing us. Our design was based on sort of older technology, and this newer VR was doing bigger and better things that we just aren't really equipped for. Our game was not designed around this. The default control type that most people expect is that you can use these wands, but at the moment, we only support this gamepad. So we are adding motion control support, but we're getting into that territory I was talking about earlier, where new features start to feel tacked on. So although you could pick something up with the wands in the Vive, our game isn't really based around that. And so it doesn't really add much to the experience. Now at this point, we're kind of heading into the future. But as new VR tech comes out now, we have different factors to take into consideration when we're making our decisions. The first is that the game is completely done. It can be changed in small ways, but the design was built around a certain set of features. The second thing is that VR marketplaces are now live. There are potentially market considerations you would take into account when deciding whether or not to support a platform. If there's lots of users on one particular headset, maybe it's worth more effort trying to get there. And so we start looking at things like Google Daydream, which is coming out later this year, I believe. And Google is building this essentially like a Gear VR. It should be a good quality mobile VR experience. It also comes with a small 3 degree of freedom motion controller, which solves our requirement for input. That should work pretty well. And since you're no longer tied to exclusively Samsung high-end phones, there's potentially a big market here. So Daydream should be a good fit for our game. And as long as the technology is sufficient, if we can get our game running at a good frame rate on this device, that's something we're really interested in. Another big one coming out this year is PlayStation VR. And PlayStation VR is a similar sort of thing where there's a big potential market here. At E3, Sony mentioned they have 40 million PlayStation 4s in the wild, and all of them are ready to run PlayStation VR. But I think what's more interesting is PlayStation VR is aimed at the living room, which really no other VR device is doing right now. One of the big changes there is that every PlayStation 4 is, at the moment, connected to a TV. And when somebody puts on a VR headset, that TV still has a purpose. It could still be used for something. And developers are trying to figure out, well, what should we put on the TV for the people who are in the room? And in our game, we have a very vital manual that people need to be reading. So we are putting the manual on the TV screen. And this is actually the first system where we don't need to say, go to a website or print out the manual. It actually makes that problem of explaining the setup a lot easier. So we're hoping that PlayStation VR will be a really good fit for the game. Now to sum up technology as design influence for this section, I will say that the technology changes have a big influence during the early stages of your game, the formative periods of your game development. But if you are ever going to ship a game, if you don't want to perpetually be chasing VR trends, they will eventually stop having an influence. You'll get to a point where your design is finished, and then new technology is really a case of accommodating new features. You're not going to redesign your game like from scratch around that. And the other big observation was that we felt really reactionary to all of these changes. These hardware manufacturers were coming out with new tech pretty rapidly. We wouldn't often have advance notice of it, and suddenly there would be a much more capable device that was coming out soon. And we would basically have to decide, can we support this? Does it add anything new or beneficial to the design? Okay, let's move on to the future. Now, Keep Talking has its own future already. We are still working on the game. The future involves PlayStation VR and 5 motion control support. That is what we are working on right now. But I think it's fun to speculate about the future and what that could bring in terms of virtual reality. I don't want to just guess at things. I don't think that's very useful. So I asked myself, what if Keep Talking was a 2016 virtual reality game instead of a 2014 virtual reality game? How would that change things? And so I started to look at what's actually happened. Because we're really getting the feeling that virtual reality has now passed us by. The hardware has improved since we shipped the game. There's things like better resolution, which is nice, but there's bigger, more important things like room scale VR and tracked controllers. There's even little things that aren't common across all headsets, but some of them have, like the built-in headphones. Some of the headsets have built-in microphones as well, or a pass-through camera. And these are things that we could be taking advantage of. Virtual reality design has changed a lot too. There's a lot of people working in VR, solving problems. The one that sticks out to me the most is the idea of locomotion, so how you get around the virtual world. We took the easy way out and we said you just don't move. That was our solution. But other people are finding ways to allow the player to move without feeling sick. There's a lot of teleportation techniques being developed. And these are interesting things that could have an influence on games. And overall, I think it's a really good thing that virtual reality has passed us by. It's surprising how quickly that has happened, but I'm glad it has, because we really played it safe with a lot of our design decisions. We wanted to not make people sick, so we didn't try a lot of adventurous things. You can do a lot of really cool stuff in VR now that you couldn't 2 years ago. So, how would we do Keep Talking if we were to do it now? Well, realistically, we'd probably do it exactly the same way, because it's been really successful. And frankly, virtual reality just isn't a big enough market yet. If we wanted to get the most return, then we would do things exactly the same way. We would support non-VR. We would support as many headsets as possible. But that's a really boring answer. I don't think that's a fair way to answer this question. And I don't think it's consistent either, because I said that our original motivation was that we wanted to explore VR content. We wanted to have fun doing it. We wouldn't be concerned about our return on investment. And to me, that sounds like we would go all in on VR tech. We would do whatever the coolest thing was, even if not too many people had it. So what's caught my eye about VR these days? What's interesting? The first is that interactions, I think, can be playful and fun now that we have tracked controllers. The Vive wands have this now. Oculus Touch and PlayStation Move controllers will bring this to more platforms in the future. And just throwing things around in virtual reality can be really fun. I kind of think of it like moving around in a really good platformer game. If you've played Super Mario or Super Meat Boy, you don't need a goal necessarily. It can be fun just to move your character around. It's satisfying, it feels good. And I think interactions in VR can be the same way. What's more, I think you can do really complex things in a very intuitive manner. If we were to do our bomb game and we had a panel that needed to have some screws undone, and then you would pull the panel away and cut a wire, that would be a very complex set of actions to model with a gamepad. But if somebody saw a panel with a screw in front of them and a screwdriver beside them, they know enough from the real world that they can pick that up and maybe try to undo it and pull it out of the way. And what's nice is we had our design problem of inputs needing to be simple. And we solved that by boiling everything down to a single button press, making it context sensitive. That was our solution. Make it really, really sort of abstracted and basic. But if you model things after the real world and it mimics it closely enough, people can start to do really complex things without much tutorialization. They will easily understand that they can move things out of the way. It will just feel right to them. And I think we could have a different solution to our problem that is a lot more compelling than what we ended up with. And lastly, the idea of exploration and investigation. Once you have room scale VR, people start wandering around and they start looking under desks. And that all just feels really natural. You just want to see what your environment is like. People ask for modes in a game, which are not a game at all. It's the idea of this tourism mode, where all the gameplay logic is turned off, but you're just left in the environment, and you can go and look around, because people are interested in just seeing things up close and from new angles. And our game requires observation of what's in front of you. But if you can wander around the room, it could require observation of what's in the corner, or what's under the desk, or what's in a drawer. And I think we can do really cool things there. The next thing, I'm so glad this animates. So this is a game called Sluggy's Fruit Emporium. It's a Vive game that's coming out soon, and you play an alien fruit vendor, and you need to sell your fruit to characters that come up. And it's the idea of going into virtual reality and becoming a new character and just acting something out. The first time I used the Vive, I was playing Job Simulator. And I was at a friend's house, and there were other people there waiting for their turn. And as soon as you strap on the headset and you start messing around in Job Simulator and breaking wine bottles and throwing cans of soup into the microwave, things like that, people around you start laughing, and you realize that you have this audience. And I almost took on this other persona where I was acting things out and putting on a little show for them. And I really don't know where it came from. but I've seen other people do the same thing. So I feel that there's some value in virtual reality as kind of a means of enabling these performances. And now a lot of people might find that kind of unappealing, but I think of it in terms of watching games on Twitch. People already like to watch other people play video games. But here's a way of making it a much more personal experience. If you know the physical nuances of your favorite streamer and how they behave in virtual reality, that's even more personal than watching them play a game with mouse and keyboard. I think there's a lot of potential there, and you're seeing things in games like Job Simulator and Fantastic Contraption with socially focused updates where streamers can do these sorts of things. Now, people aren't going to all embrace this sort of thing. There's a lot of technical challenges around VR on things like Twitch. People are going to get very tired. It's much more difficult to do stuff like this than just play Hearthstone. But I do think it could be big. It doesn't need to take over, but it could be big. And lastly is the idea that players are hungry. This is just an observation that I've made based on people making comments on things like Twitter and Reddit. But I feel players are really desperate for something that justifies the purchase they've made. Perhaps they bought a very expensive headset, and all the time that they've spent extolling the virtues of virtual reality. They want some game that they can point to and say, you cannot do this without virtual reality. This is why you should get it. They're still looking for their idea of a killer app. Now, I don't think there is a singular killer app. I just think there needs to be something for each individual person that allows them to rationalize why they believe in VR. And to me, this means that people probably have an appetite to try lots of stuff and try lots of weird things. So yes, there's people who want to play Skyrim in VR, but we're not going to make Skyrim. We could, however, make a weird bomb defusing game. And if people are willing to try anything because they're desperate and looking for something to enjoy, then they're probably willing to give our weird idea a shot. So, Keep Talking Nobody Explodes 2016. What would we do? Well, we'd go whole hog on it. It would be room scale, for sure. There would be fun interactions, lots of tools. There'd be wire cutters and screwdrivers and power drills. There'd be environmental clues everywhere. You'd have to look in drawers and shuffle boxes off the shelves and things like that. And we'd probably come up with something that made it fun to watch other people play this, like a bomb suit that was wandering around. Just lots of cool ideas. And it's really it's really tempting to get excited about these things. But what struck me is none of them are in service of interesting communication, which is what our game's about. Some of them would directly take focus away from interesting communication. And our game is as much about the people outside of VR as it is for the one player inside. And all of these things could kind of upset that balance. So there would be this different emphasis on exploration and interaction. And to me, it sounds kind of like we're going back to that idea of making a bomb defusing simulator. And that was a really scary realization, because that idea of a bomb defusing simulator was one we had back before we knew what made our game fun. And so I kind of come to the conclusion that adapting the game to take advantage of today's VR is kind of a flawed premise. It's not as simple as just adding these features, even if they were really, really well done. Because each step that we take towards, say, embracing room scale VR takes us further away from the original design that we've made around the game. And that's why I feel that, at best, we can really only accommodate things like tracked controllers. They're technically supported, but ultimately they feel a little bit tacked on, a bit of an afterthought. And I'm torn as to whether this is really obvious or maybe a really subtle trap. If you think about a game like Doom, and you want to bring the original Doom to virtual reality, hopefully you would recognize that Doom's design is a set of solutions to very different problems that existed at the time, and all of the design is focused around Doom when it was made. And so if you tried to just translate it to virtual reality, there would be a lot of problems. But with something like Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, it already supports virtual reality, so it should be easy to translate it, right? But in my mind, a cohesive design should have all of its parts be necessary. They need to support one another, and Keep Talking just wasn't designed with room scale in mind. And this sort of thing is not a problem that's unique to virtual reality, new technology coming out and making an old design obsolete. But the speed at which virtual reality has evolved in just a couple years, I think makes this more of a trap. And it's kind of a conclusion that makes sense based on how Keep Talking was made. It evolved alongside its environment. And so if we were to raise Keep Talking in a different environment, we should get a completely different game. And it's entirely possible that there's a fun game down that road. I believe there probably is. But the only way we can find that game is if we actually travel down that road and start all over again. Okay, so let's get some conclusions here. This is what I'm calling the reality of virtual reality. Hopefully these aren't revelations. So I do feel that there's no clear winner right now as far as virtual reality headsets are concerned. There may never be a singular winner, and that can totally be fine. The VR user base right now is still kind of the Wild West. People are supporting a bunch of different headsets, and that's probably going to get even more diversified in the near future. I will say that there is kind of a divide that's emerged between mobile VR and sort of this room scale VR, the idea of can you move around or not? And you might be tempted to think, well, room scale is the superior version. It's just better in every way. But it's maybe not as clear cut as that. Mobile VR has better portability. It's easier to set up right now and to share with other people. There's no wires tethered to the back of your head. And the install base is quite a bit bigger for mobile VR than room scale VR. But having said that, the divide might just be temporary anyway. A lot of these things are technical problems. And as we've seen, VR tech evolves rapidly. So these things might be solved sooner rather than later. The idea of supporting everything is not as simple as it sounds. You might just think I'll support all headsets and that's my solution. If you saw Alex's talk earlier, supporting everything technically is actually really challenging, but those are solvable problems. The bigger problem is that supporting all sorts of devices means that you kind of have to support the lowest common denominator of features. And that's going to compromise some of your design or cause you to repeat different elements for each headset feature. Next is the idea that if you're going to ship your game, you do need to choose some tech to support. That's just kind of a consequence of when you ship your game, it has to ship on something. You don't need to choose just one necessarily, but you do need to choose something. And the fact that things are evolving so quickly means that your choice will eventually become outdated. The tech is evolving in significant ways. What happens if room scale VR no longer has wires? Is that going to change anything for you? What happens if mobile gets inside-out tracking and suddenly you can move around on mobile VR? What happens if we get good body tracking or finger tracking? Some of these things are going to happen, and your design might be based on them not existing, and that could result in you feeling left behind. So what have we, as the developers keep talking, what have we learned from all of this? The first was that we had to roll with the punches, because really that's all you can do. I'm a firm believer that you really shouldn't dictate what a game should be, but rather come up with a concept and then discover what your game should grow into. And while you're doing that, be open to changes in technology as they come up. Be aware that trying to predict things is really, really tricky. We thought that DK2 would lead into CB1, but Gear VR came out of nowhere. We also had no idea that the Vive existed until it was revealed. So room scale caught us totally by surprise. At the time, being conservative worked really well for us. We support non-VR, which is maybe not something that you will want to do in the future, but for us, that kind of halfway between VR and non-VR was really successful. And if your return on investment is really critical to you, you might still want to consider being conservative. VR markets are not very big, and if that's important to you, then you might need to support non-VR as well. And lastly, the idea that long dev cycles left us feeling behind. This tech happens so quickly, things change so much. that our game has spanned a lot of these tech changes. Our game has been around longer than a lot of these headsets. And that leaves us feeling kind of behind. Our game is now out and we support it, but technology has surpassed us. And so going forward, we're going to experiment on shorter stuff. I think our next game will be much smaller than Keep Talking. And I think that's about it for time. But if you want, you can follow me on Twitter. You can find out more about our game here. I don't think we have time for questions, but if you see me around, feel free to ask or send me a tweet or an email. Thank you.
谢谢 Ben 带给我们的精彩分析跟演讲。那因为时间的关系，我们上午的第一场就在这边结束。那外面我们有备有点心，还有饮料，那欢迎大家可以享用下午茶。谢谢。那下一场会在30分钟后3点钟开始。